Hey, welcome to the Agile Podcast. That was my amazing intro. All right, theme music. It's time for theme music on the Agile Podcast. See, that's a high level of professionalism right there. It's so sad that I'm going to cut all this out. So sometimes I find articles that I think are interesting or otherwise incendiary, or so maybe things I want to highlight because they're educational or they're the right article at the right time for what I'm experiencing. And I don't know which of those categories the article that I found here fits into, but I figured we'd check it out. It's an article called "We Should Stop Trying to Make Scrum Fit for Every Situation" by Willem-Jan Ageling. I made it, but I barely made it.
You made it.
Willem-Jan Ageling runs SeriousScrum.
Co-founder of SeriousScrum. A tsunami of sense. I love that. If you have to have sense, you better have a tsunami of it, because at least some may stick. I love it.
A common thing that I hear, is what stuck this article out in my mind, is people waffle back and forth between Scrum and Kanban and kind of talk about it. And then some people will say, well, we just do what works for us, so they're not really implementing the Scrum model. And then you have the CST philosophy of, well, if you're not implementing it exactly as is, that would be why you're failing. And
right.
So he says in the article, his kind of hypothesis right here that I have on the screen is Scrum exists for very specific situations where all of these have to apply. Otherwise, you probably should reconsider. He says it right here. All 6 of these prerequisites need to apply. If you don't tick one of the boxes, then reconsider working with Scrum. All right. So here, let's step through his 6 items. The first of those 6 items is the following statement. And again, he says you need all of these, right? You should really reconsider if you're changing any of these. So the first one is you create or maintain one product at a time. And we can go down here into the article to find out what evidence he gives for one product at a time.
Yeah, so it's interesting that he's saying that all 6 of them have to apply. We can talk about that at the end. Right now, the one product. If teams aren't focused on a singular product, are they focused? So he's saying that if you've got multiple products, you can't keep a team busy sprint after sprint because these products are small and don't require much work. This is, I think, somewhat of a generalization because it depends on the industry, right, that you're in, what the product is. If it's simply, you're talking about a piece of software, okay, maybe this is true. But Scrum isn't just used for software anymore, right? Used to be, but not anymore. To allow a team to work to full capacity, they work on 2 or more products every sprint.
I think that's the product.
It's saying if you're doing multiple.
Yeah, he's saying in the case where you are doing multiples, it's the products are probably really, really thin and
right, and Scrum's not the best thing to use.
And because you probably like your priorities are probably thrashing between a little bit here, a little bit there, and you may not be able to keep your backlog truly ordered. I'm not even reading the article. I'm just kind of throwing out from my experience. You may not be able to keep your backlog ordered because you might be fighting the fire of the day with one product, and you might kind of throw away what you had started the sprint. Let's say you're on a 2-week cadence, you get 4 days into the 2-week cadence, something blows up in product 2 that you're not working on. Now you got to kind of scrap the rest of the stuff you had in the sprint and just go over the price. So from that perspective, I understand what he's saying, and I sort of pseudo agree with it. That was in the world of mobile development, when the company that I was at had more than one mobile application. Maintaining the mobile applications was that way. One mobile application is tiny.
Right.
You can basically test and roll it out to production in a day or 2. Execute your change, test it, roll it out, run your automation if you're lucky enough to have it, and then deploy it to the stores and stuff like that. Even if you're involving users and previewing with the users and stuff, still, it's not 2 weeks worth of work. I guess from my perspective, I'm coming from a mindset of like they have good CI/CD practices. They have standard planning events that are properly timed. You have everyone you need to do the work. Like everything is kind of optimum in my head in this example I'm giving. But
yeah, no, you're right. I suppose if you look at it from the perspective of more than one product, what do you have? Do you have a product backlog or do you have 2 product backlogs, right? And now you've already got your product owner scattered over 2 of them, your team too. assuming it's the same team that's looking at both, right? So Scrum, one team looking at two products, or multiple, heaven forbid if it's more than two. So I guess he's right. A singular product is probably optimal. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that becomes sacrosanct in that you should never have two products. So sometimes you have two products. They're not really two separate products. They're joined at the hip.
Mm-hmm.
They're contributing to a greater product,
Mm-hmm.
in which case the team could develop both. A case in point. So you're looking at a mobile product, but there's also a web product that goes along with that. Do you deliver one and then work on the other? Or do you work on both
Mm-hmm.
and deliver them both? Or in an ideal world, you only deliver one, which is designed the way it's supposed to be, which is adaptive and responsive, right?
Yeah.
Which makes it a little bit more complex. But so, yeah, I don't think it's 100% rule in my book anyway, but it's close, right?
We should finish his reasoning, but I will tell you the example I'm now pivoting to kind of defend his case is the data platform that I worked on. I talked about in a previous podcast. The data platform consumed data from other sources around the very, very large company that was building the platform. And each data source could be considered its own product. Even though you're joining it together on the platform and the platform sort of was a product, the data really was the product. It just happened that we were building an architecture that consolidated the different data sets, but every data set had their own needs. So I don't know, maybe it's a good example, maybe it's not. But when you're making data available, you're making data available to somebody so they can build some sort of visualization based off of it. And then every visualization is different. All the data is used is different. So It's a bad product in terms of like how most people think of a product. Most people think of a product as the first example I use. It's a mobile app. You click here. It does this.
It's fairly well defined.
It's very well defined.
Yeah,
and this is the opposite of that. You could think of it as multiple products. Because every user that used it was completely different. So I don't know. Maybe I'm going into more of a user discovery type of situation. Maybe that's where I'm hinting at. But I'm willing to read on here. So his first example was when you have multiple products, right? And they're all tiny, and you're kind of thrashing back and forth. I was gonna say I hunted through the article. I was like, he's going to use the word focus in here somewhere. I can completely see teams to focus as a whole on one product at a time, no matter how small the effort.
It's valid, right?
I can see that. I can see that. Another issue that he points out is that you have a team with product owner. Oh, I see. With product owners in name, but component. He calls them component owners or feature owners.
You work in a feature factory.
Yeah, you work at a feature factory. That's common.
Very common,
it's very
unfortunately,
common.
But yes.
Yeah. I haven't heard component owners before. That's a new one that I've not heard. But now that I am reading it, it makes total sense.
Listen, it makes sense to the example we were talking about before we went on the air. You know, if you're making airplanes, you have component owners, basically. You don't have feature owners because each component has gazillion features as such, right? So on a macro level, it's a component. And your component has to fit in like a cog in a machine with all the other components. Mm-hmm. And some of these aren't internal. So they're farmed out to external vendors to produce to exacting specifications, right?
He says they have authority to make decisions on maximizing the value. Hang on a second. Let me cut back to the article. He says component owners, feature owners, they have the authority to make decisions on maximizing the value of their component, but doesn't automatically mean that it's the best choice for maximizing the value of the product as a whole. And I 100% agree with what he's saying. But in the Boeing aircraft example, all the components have to fit together. When I think of the process of building an aircraft, I think of all the teams, all the component teams that are building the aircraft. I don't think of them as component teams. They are component teams. They're building components, right? The vendors build components, other people build components.
Correct.
But I think of them all as smaller circles that scale up and up and up until you get to some kind of final circle that's a much smaller team that has kind of oversight to all the rest of the smaller teams.
That indeed is correct, because I can tell you these components, n number of components fit together to formulate a module. So that they're looking at, let's say, for example, avionics or hydraulics or whatever it is.
Here,
right?
Let me cut back to the.
So yeah, I'd concur with that. I concur that a module is a series of components where the contributors can vary from internal teams to external vendors.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, my experience is program. I would call that a program. If you had whatever, a chief product owner, whatever, at the top tier of the program, at the top circle or the top of the pyramid, whatever you want to call it. If it's some kind of chief product owner and chief scrum master or whatever, they usually are called project managers at that point, but I think of them as like a chief scrum master. And then more and more teams as you go closer to the bottom of the pyramid. Although the aircraft example is probably a good one to stick with, because it's tough to disprove his assertion using the aircraft example, because in the aircraft example, they really are component team members, and you really have to take extra steps getting those component teams to see the overall system. Because I would expect the natural course in a large program like that is for the teams responsible for the components to naturally gravitate away from caring about seeing, being visible to the big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And they take extreme pains to make sure that everybody understands the big picture.
Yeah.
Because you kind of have to. It's not because your component is not up to mark. It's because of the unknowns. You don't know how your or somebody else's component, when interacting together, what behavior that's going to display. And so you kind of have to think outside of just your area. And then whatever touches your area is the natural tendencies. We're gonna integrate with all of these things that touch on the periphery of our module, or not even a component, but a module. But then they go to the next level, which is a module plus another module. You still think outside of that, and it just scales up. To your point about using that as a program, it scales up, and there's extensive amounts of testing, thankfully, because you're talking about putting 100 tons of steel in the air with 200 people on it. So but that example is perhaps a little bit of an anomaly in the kind of the day-to-day, where people are just building. They're building software. There could be medical software or something critical, but I think the parallels still hold true in that most teams do focus on, or should focus on, one component at a time, or one product at a time, with at least one product backlog is what I'm trying to get to. One product backlog for a team, because more than one product backlog already gets you scattered as a team. And then as a product owner, you're now lost between two. How do you drive your teams with two backlogs? How do you drive your teams with more than two backlogs?
Drive your team apart. That's how you drive
exactly.
your team.
Drive them into the ground. So to that end, he's probably right.
That's what he points out down here. He says many organizations have the false notion that a product owner should serve one team, and this only a piece of the product. But product owners don't manage a team's backlog; they manage the product backlog. Product owner, product backlog, and that does make a lot of sense. Again, the product backlog for the aircraft example for us, it would have a lot of different things that don't seem to be related in it. By one of the teams looking at the backlog,
right?
There'd be a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, but it'd be stuff for other teams,
Absolutely.
I don't know, no product. Teams that don't create or sustain a product at all. They merely have a list of unrelated tasks and actions to work on. May not be aware of the work on a product. In case you're looking at defining this. What?
I think he may be talking about teams that perhaps do maintenance work. I don't know. Well, why would you not have a product at the center of it all? What are you there to do?
I mean,
it could be a service for sure.
It's
still a product.
I've seen teams that do a lot of one-off tasks, especially infrastructure type teams. They do a lot of one-off tasks. They don't have a product. It's in contribution to the product, so I mean, I would kind of push against it. But the most I understand the example of you don't really have a product, but that's what I kind of translated it to when I heard it. Was a maintenance team. They don't really have a product. There's other product teams doing products and features or whatever, and they're just there to keep the lights, running.
Yeah. So you're right. You could be doing one-off tasks, whatever you want to call them, right? But they're a means to an end. They're still contributing value.
Yeah.
I oftentimes hear people say it's a technical story. What's a technical story? Well, we're adding CPUs to our VM.
Yeah.
Right? Or we're adding extra memory. Why are you doing that? So they say, well, because. And eventually if you ask them why, they'll say it's because somebody reported slowness in performance. Aha. So you're doing this to improve performance. So there's something visible to your customer, right? That's where the value is. So it's not just a technical story
Yeah.
or an architectural story. Those things are basically a fallacy. Everything should roll up to business value. But yeah, I understand that sometimes there isn't a tangible product that you're delivering. You're delivering a service. You're delivering an improvement in performance.
That teams that just fix bugs all day. You know what I mean? I've seen that too. You know,
For sure.
Where
But they're delivering quality.
yeah, they are. They are. But they're not managed in a way like they're air quotes real development teams. So they use Scrum only because the rest of the teams in the organization were using Scrum, but in reality, like they're not planning anything. Their backlog is in flux constantly, or maybe they're grabbing stuff out of the other backlog.
Well, the input's unpredictable anyway. Yeah.
I think that's probably the point of the one product. It's kind of a statement about predictability, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, true.
All right, let's hit his second item here, which is you regularly have to verify if your work helps to achieve your objective. So let's go down into the article. Regular verification of the journey.
Well, if you're not doing that, then you're essentially doing waterfall. You gather your requirements in March and you deliver in December and hope that's still what they want.
Mm-hmm.
If you're regularly inspecting along the way and getting feedback, that's really, I think, where he's driving to, right? Through the use of events like the sprint review and so forth.
When your environment is predictable, you don't need to verify if you're working on the right things because you know you are right. That's every development manager I've ever worked with.
Right.
Oh, they know the right thing to work on.
Exactly.
Yeah. You'd have a sprint review without a purpose because you know that you're working on maximum value. I want to stop right here because I'm pretty sure that some people that stuck around past that first minute and a half are now angry and wanting to click away. But I'm going to tell you, don't click away. Maybe your development manager doesn't know. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe they're not building the right thing and they need to talk to a user. I would also say if you're on a Scrum team and you don't have a sprint review on your menu at all, you know what I mean? We don't need sprint reviews. Who are we going to demo to? It's really technical work, Om. It's just us that would understand it.
Right.
We don't need sprint reviews. Everyone knows what we're doing that is interested in our highly technical big brain work.
So think about it this way. Let's say you're building a new home, right? So your builder's building the home. You're the homeowner. You're eventually going to get the home when they finish it. Why should the builder show it to anybody until it's completely finished, and then he'll just hand you the keys? That's not how it works in real life because there are inspections of various types that need to happen. So inspectors come in and they look at what's going on. They look at the plumbing, the electricity, the way it's wired and all of this stuff. All I'm saying is the stakeholders vary, but you're still doing some sort of a review at some point to somebody. Mm-hmm. And if you're an astute homeowner, you'd swing by every now and then to see how it's going.
I would argue you should be there when whatever stage that they're in when your inspection is happening. You should be there when that inspection is happening. I might lose some people here, but when you have your foundation poured and the plumbing is in, because the plumbing's in when they pour the foundation, like in Florida anyway, different areas of the country and different areas of the world is different. Right? Sometimes I wish this wasn't true because it's a huge pain, right, later. But all your plumbing's in place and then they pour the foundation. Now you need to get someone out to both inspect the foundation and to check out all the drains and all that stuff, you know. And I want to know every step that comes beyond that builds on those two very critical things. So I want to make sure at that stage, before anything else is done, that everything is absolutely the way I want it before moving on. Same thing with the installing your HVAC ducting and, you know, installing your electrical lines and stuff like that. Like, the time to check that stuff is before all the drywall is installed, and now you can't see it. Now you got to climb into the attic in the middle of the dark and in the heat and crawl around. And if you need to make a change, it's extremely difficult after to make a change.
Indeed. Actually, you should probably go there before the drywall's up and take pictures of I call it the carcass, so you can see where the AC lines run and the wires run. So in the future, if you want to hang up a piece of painting or something, you're not going to pierce a wire or an AC drain. It behooves you to do that and keep those pictures.
I'm a big fan of just driving.
Just go for it, man.
So whenever you hang a picture, don't use a 1 1/4 inch screw. You use a 4 inch screw. Use a big 3 inch screw. Drive it straight through one wall, straight through the other wall is behind it.
I'm laughing because just recently I put up a large screen TV on an external wall. Basically, it's a concrete wall, right? And so you don't have the gap there. All you have is a furring streak. And I knew that they had put the AC drain through that area of the wall. So it was critical for me not to drill through that pipe.
Yeah.
Not that I know that now because it's winter, the AC is not running, but I will find out at one point when I start seeing mold. But yeah, so anyway, the whole point of this is there are inspections everywhere throughout the process, and that's the review. You don't wait till the end, and you don't say you have a product or a service that is not demonstrable. Is that a word? Demonstrable? Demonstrable?
Yeah.
Demonstrable.
Sure.
Yeah, you've got to be able to show your work, basically, in full transparency.
I make up words all the time,
Yeah,
so
I
it's
do
fine. It's okay. Yeah. People are not at the podcast because of my grammar, I'll tell you that. A product backlog intentionally is highly adaptable to allow changes and refinement. When you allow these changes not to come, there's no reason to have a product backlog. Yeah, I mean, of course.
Sure.
Like, when you don't need a sprint review, a product backlog, and refining, you don't need Scrum. Yeah, all right. That's pretty straightforward. All right, I'll come back to the article now. I think this is this bullet, so excuse me if we figure out that this is the wrong one. Your knowledge on how to build the product emerges while working on it.
That doesn't sit well with a lot of people. How do you start before you know what you're supposed to be doing, right? That's usually the kind of like the pushback against that. But, in Agile we say, well, you need to know just enough, and then you explore and you figure out as you go how to do the rest of it. And you keep doing that throughout the journey. So you inspect and adapt, basically, you use that term. But a lot of times people say, no, they need a detailed plan before they can, give the go-ahead to start and allocate resources to it. God, I hate that
Well,
term.
that's the crux here. And I'm trying to think of how I would poke holes here, but this is a difficult one to poke holes in because it's pretty rock solid, from my opinion, which is if your organization cannot be... He's not talking organization here. That's not where he's coming at it. But if your organization cannot be the type of organization that is okay with that, the cone of uncertainty type of, the closer you get to the deliverable, the more solid the understanding of how you're solving the problem is going to be. That's kind of what he's saying here. If your organization isn't comfortable with that and wants all the planning done up front, that what you're describing, that this is not going to work.
It certainly
Scrum
is
not going to work.
Imagine if NASA wouldn't start an initiative because they didn't know everything there is to know about a journey out to a far distant place, right? I mean, they'd never get off the ground, literally.
Yeah, I would imagine that some people would use NASA as an example to push back against Agile. They'd be like, well, you can't build an MVP space shuttle like that kind of, you know what I mean?
You sure can. You just have to have the right definition of what MVP is. Right?
I agree with you on that one. I was like, yeah,
you don't need fur-lined headliners and leather seating for that. Not in your MVP.
You think about what a space shuttle does, and I can certainly build you a MVP space shuttle. You think about what
it's a slingshot. Basically.
About what they were doing with they weren't sending people up on the SpaceX rockets. They were just testing that they could land it. They could land the rocket itself. They're reusable. Recover it. And you can have no intent on putting people in it, or your intent eventually could be, I want to use this on every manned flight up into space and then reuse the rocket itself because it's really expensive to keep building and throwing away. So, but on your first couple flights, and any equipment that services people, you don't need any of that.
You don't even need a crash test.
Leave it at. Yeah,
not on the first one. You don't.
I would say you don't want a crash test dummy on the first one. But you leave all that stuff out, and because it's not included in your MVP. So I just brought that one up because that one sticks out at me as one that would be used to push back against Agile.
Yeah. Yeah, there are others like that. I agree with you. Yeah, people do that. People do say, how do you do this if you don't know everything there is to know? So, because you can't possibly know what there is. Well, you don't know what you don't know. That's the bottom line. As you go, you find out, and then you just pivot as as you progress down the journey.
Well, I would even say like you could have your MVP for a space shuttle. You need a method of breaking Earth's gravity to get into space, and without that, you might as well not do anything else. So, like in my product mind, I'm like, you can develop and test the engine
Yep.
and make sure that it gets you the power that you need.
You need that escape velocity.
And the efficiency that you, because there's a thing about engine efficiency too. And until you figure that out, you really can't move on. So you can kind of do an MVP.
You sure can.
You know,
If you think about it hard enough, you can do an MVP for just about anything. That's my assertion anyway.
but yeah, I think the bullet point should be, it's understood that your knowledge of how to build the product will emerge while you're working on it, and that is okay in your organization. That's encouraged in your organization.
Right. Yeah.
Well, let's move on. You can create product increments within no more than a month, preferably faster. Okay. Then creating increments within a sprint. They're very related, these two in the article. Yeah. I feel like they could have been separated a bit more. So in the article, I'm presenting the article. Man. So creating product increments within a sprint, his section of the article to talk about this. And he's going back to the point of you can create product increments within the no more than a month. Your time box is your product increment.
Right. So it's the month that I have a little bit of an issue with, because if you're talking about the stereotypical software development, then yeah, sure. But if you're talking about the Boeing example that we were using earlier, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything done in a sprint. There will be some value, but it will be minuscule. Sure, it's building up to something, but it wouldn't be tangible enough to say this is it for the sprint. It's like, we've done this, now we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. Okay, now we have something. Maybe.
Well, I'm kind of getting lost in the middle of the article, but this right here helped me. It says he's worked with teams that stated that they could not do this. Basically, this meaning they couldn't produce something after just a month. They need more than a month to produce something is basically what they're saying.
They probably have dependencies.
Yeah, tons of some teams were unsuccessful due to the nature of their environment. Come across multiple reasons why teams couldn't create increments within a month. Examples are dependency with external parties like hardware suppliers and the complexity of the product itself. Scrum without inspection of the product increment at the sprint review has no value. That kind of dovetails into the evolution of what he was talking about before with if you're not doing, where's it? Can I get a quote? If you don't need a sprint review, you don't need to use Scrum, because you have people that are telling you, oh, they know.
Right. Yeah.
They know what the customer needs.
Yes, I suppose no matter what the size of the time box is and the complexity of the product, you still have to inspect and do a review and make sure you're heading in the right direction. The important thing here, of course, is to get feedback, right? Every sprint, get feedback and say, no matter how small it is, here's what we've got. Is this really what we need? And if not, let's pivot now instead of waiting a month from now or 3 months or a year from now. So I think what he's saying is right. Whether it's software or you're building a new jet, it's still right that you have to get feedback.
Yeah, I mean, again, coming at this from I like to analyze a lot of these things that get bogged down in delivery type details of how often you're delivering and how often the separation. We didn't even go into the separation between, like, I'm delivering the software, but am I sending, like, you could cut sending it to production out of we're producing the increment. It's going to stage, test, whatever, maybe some kind of beta environment or whatever, but it's not going all the way through to production because maybe I'm in financial services or whatever, and I have some kind of regulation where I can't make changes in production but once a quarter or something.
There's many examples. So you could be in tax where you're bound by certain calendar events. You could be in healthcare or insurance industry, let's say, where open enrollment only happens at a certain time, and that's when you can launch your product. The question isn't necessarily that why is it not in production. The question is what you've done valuable? Does it have value? Yeah. And if it has value, then you've delivered. As a team, you've delivered. You haven't failed, you've delivered. Yes, it's not in production, but that's not your decision anyway. That decision is not with the team. And a lot of teams struggle with that.
A lot of people struggle with that as a concept, the divorcing of the end of the time box of the sprint and then the sending of the increment to production, deploying it in production. Those two activities are completely divorced in my head, and I find it difficult to go back to, this is probably a statement on me more than anything else, but I find it difficult to go back to someone who doesn't understand the difference between the end of the sprint. Oh, you guys finished. It's the end of your sprint. Why is this stuff not in production? And I will tell them, we can change our definition of done where everything goes into production. But in order to do that, we're going to have to overhaul the continuous delivery mechanisms and all the check-in, check-out, code review processes that come along with leading to that, which also potentially leads to an overhauling of your entire back end and the way it works, which it may not even be your back end. It might be the way that your software is put together. If you have legacy stuff that's a monolith and stuff like that, and it's not, you don't have like a modern architecture, microservices and stuff powering all your little pieces of your software, the conversation might spark. I understand what you want to do. What you want to do is you want to have continuous delivery. You want to have full CI/CD where every single work item is disconnected from every other work item. There are no dependencies. Right. And when you check something in and it goes through your process in your sprint, it immediately goes to production when it's done in the sprint. And then at the sprint review, we can just pull up production and walk you through in production, because that in our definition of done bakes in releasing. So we're doing very little tiny micro release. However, what you have to invest engineering wise to get to a point where your definition done can encompass that boundary, usually for people that don't understand already the separation between those two, usually those companies with people that don't understand that, they're the previous what I described with it. Lots of monoliths and things stuck together. And
yeah, you really have to gear up your capability to get there, but you may not even be able to do it for all the examples we cited above. Regulatory industry, right? Mm-hmm. Time dependencies, all of those things. Mm-hmm. So for legit reasons, you're not going to production.
Well, you
all the time.
You might be able to. I mean, if you have very mature DevOps practices and you're working with feature flags and stuff like that, you turn things off.
Turn them on and off at will. Yeah, you can do that.
If you really are talking like changing the heart of some kind of financial processing system or whatever, you can't turn that on and off. I mean, I guess you could, but use this logic or that logic type of flag, but you probably wouldn't at that point. You probably wouldn't do that change. But I've seen companies that they don't produce a single feature without a flag to be able to enable it, disable it. And that's basically the way they do business. They push stuff to production all the time, and then they wait for the business users, completely non-technical, non-software development, not non-technical. They are very technical in the fields that they work in, and they're the ones that basically throw the flag on. Development's like, we've tested it. We have a bunch of automation that makes sure that the feature is going to work when the flag goes on. We've tested it inside of our sprint, and here it is. It's off right now. You make the decision when you want to enable it. Get your press release ready, or your email blast ready, or get your angry tweets ready, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so those organizations that have that, they've already upped their capability to that point. And it's not just the infrastructural capabilities having DevOps. It's the human practices, the DevOps principles. People are actually behaving according to those principles, right? As well as having the infrastructural components in place where they can deliver these things, and the discipline, right? Like you said, testing everything with the feature n number of ways, right? What happens if the feature is off when you're expecting it to be on, and vice versa, and all of that, exploratory testing, all of those kinds of things. Not a whole lot of companies have done that. Some have. And others probably have that I just don't know about, but I don't think it's very widely prevalent out there. I think the older model where you go live to production with a new feature already turned on at that point in time is still very much in use out there. Yeah. Sadly.
Yeah. I think we're closing in here on the last item or two.
Fourth one I think we're on.
We did create product. Yeah. We did that when we talked about the time box. You need a team to build the product. This seems very simple.
Yes.
You need a team to build. Where is it?
The team.
Yeah. The team. Yeah, it's very, very succinct. Scrum is a framework to create products with a team or multiple teams. If you have individuals creating a product, Scrum makes no sense. All team-related aspects would be obsolete. Doesn't mean aspects of Scrum can't be useful. Sprint review comes to mind, but Scrum as a framework is team-oriented, so it doesn't apply to individuals. This is a really good, very, very succinct. I mean, that could be a LinkedIn post just by itself, just those two tiny paragraphs. And I don't think you would lose any of the meaning. I want to ask, how in depth do you want to get with this one about, let me read his thing again. He's saying Scrum is a team sport, basically.
Absolutely.
And if you're not going to approach it as a team, you shouldn't be playing a team sport. But I've been on tons of teams that they don't peer program. They probably do. I mean, they do code reviews. Most of the teams I've been on do code reviews. I don't know what those code reviews look like. Maybe they're like, I throw it.
Glance.
I throw it into the ether, and then somebody else picks it up, and they never communicate with me. They just kind of make no,
If I don't hear back, it's good.
Exactly. Yeah. That kind of code, rather than us sitting together,
right,
looking over it, type of thing. They plan, but when they plan from the perspective of, this person's going to take this one, so I'm not going to pay attention to anything in the discussion. Or, that area of the code is Bob's area, and this is Jim's area. So
that's front end work, so I don't care about that. I'm a DB engineer.
But the majority of teams I've been on, this is a regular occurrence that people don't know how to collaborate, or are not actively seeking to collaborate, are not pushed to collaborate. I don't really know why, now that I'm talking about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is very, very common out there. And I think part of it is everybody goes in thinking, how are they evaluated? They're evaluated as individuals. So I'm going to do great working just on the front end because that's my forte, right? And then when it doesn't work, I know it won't be my fault because my stuff is shiny, bright, it works. So the team evaluation is really not very common, where people are just, as a team, you're saying, okay, this team did great, as opposed to Bob or Mary or whatever. I think that's part of the issue. I think the other part of the issue is simply just historical. A lot of teams aren't just at the level of maturity they need to be at. And that's just a function of how long they've been together. And what goes into that hopper is really all about, you have a lot of churn on your team, so okay, the teams are still in forming, and then they barely get out, and boom, again, they go back down into forming, right? Down that slippery slope. They never get to highly performing. Yeah. And that's part of the equation here. And then tech leads. These tech leads, they grew up working in that sort of mode. They were an ETL engineer, let's say, but they don't know anything about the front end, so that's what they espouse of their teams, as opposed to somebody who says, okay, this is cross-functional work, and anybody could pick up a task on any story from anybody. It's not like this story is owned by Fred or Mary or whatever. Yeah. That's very rare, unfortunately.
Yeah, we should pencil that in for an entire episode about the number one thing that teams are not doing that's kind of holding them back, that nobody really thinks about or talks about. You know, I don't know how. I don't really have any suggestions. I'd have to really think about it and maybe talk to some other people and think about what I want to say on the topic, because you can't just come in and be like, all right, now peer program. That's like coming in and telling the kids, all right, kids, play nicely with one another. They're going to ignore you and go back to what they were doing.
Kids actually do better at it than adults do. Unfortunately. You've seen them, right? They go and they start talking to each other. Yeah. Adults don't. They like to carve out their little territory, and you can see the arms folding. And So, but I think it's a good idea to talk about it at another podcast, because when we hire people as team members into a team, what do we look at? We look at their technical skills, and that's about it. There's no evaluation of how they work well together with other people. And the whole premise of this fifth bullet here is it's a team sport, to your point, right? So you've got to be able to play well in a team. And if you can't communicate, you can't collaborate, you're not reaching out for help, or you're not reaching out to help, then it doesn't matter how strong your skills are.
Yeah, I would also say the color I'm bringing to this article that I feel is kind of left out is the organizational aspect. Your organization kind of needs to lend itself to understanding that this is a team thing. We need to build a strong team. We need to maintain strong product teams, whatever, durable teams, whatever people want to call it. Yep. And from that perspective, even if you had people that wanted to do this, like, this is a no-go if your organization, like this story I told last night, if your organization doesn't support it. The story I told last night had to do with a Kanban team with 8 people on it doing maintenance work, bugs coming in. Occasionally they get pushed enhancements, tiny enhancements that they could do and get done real quick. But mainly it was support bugs that users and other people around the organization would find, and it's kind of stuff would get pushed to them. With small refactor tasks too. So a maintenance and support kind of team. And they were a contracted team too. And they were 8 developers and a Scrum Master, and they purely Kanban, so 3 columns to do, in progress and done. And they had a WIP limit of 4. And they refused any requests to push back from the organization on that WIP limit of 4 because they were like, we're a maintenance team. We're maintaining all this different code, and we didn't write any of it. So anytime we go in to do any change, it's doing surgery on a new species of...
learning everything all over again.
Yeah.
Reverse engineering some stuff.
And they had strong feelings about, like, nobody should touch this code by themselves. And then even if they know what they're doing, nobody should be touching the code by themselves because there's always an opportunity to learn. And I think the only reason they could get away with that is because in their contract, it was sold in the contract that way. Like that was one of their terms in the contract, which if you're a contract firm or selling development services, you should totally steal that model and put it in your contract. Because that was the only way. Otherwise, they would have been 8 people on a team. The WIP limit would have been 28. 20. Yeah.
So true.
All right. So his last bullet here at the top is you have stakeholders that should be involved in the product journey.
Yeah. I mean, in real life, I would probably rephrase that a little bit and say you should have stakeholders that must be involved in your product journey. But
let's see.
In order to do Scrum, he's saying, right?
Yes, stakeholder involvement is key. Without it, it doesn't make sense to use Scrum. Teams and their stakeholders need to discuss the product increment at the sprint review. The whole point of Scrum is to show, I forgot how to read apparently. So the whole point is, I don't know what commas or parentheses or periods mean anymore, I guess. The whole point of Scrum is to show a new piece of working functionality to stakeholders and collaborate with them on how to proceed. Yeah, I agree with that. I can empathize with this because I just joined a team and they don't have a strong delineation between the backlog refinements, grooming, or the sprint review. It's kind of all the same to them. I'm like, yeah, I understand why it's all the same. Because your product backlog, you don't spend enough time planning. So your product backlog, you're constantly really doing refinement, even in your sprint plannings, right up until the point where you start working on the item. You're doing refinement. So and they asked me, well, what's the purpose of the sprint review? I'm like, well, the purpose is twofold. As a product owner, there's 2 things that I need out of that meeting. Number 1, I need the cameras to be on because we're all remote. I need the cameras to be on so I can see the user's face when we show them the feature, so that I can look at what their expression is right when we show them the feature, because I need that. I need that unfiltered, nonverbal feedback.
That's key.
I was like, number 1, I need that. And I was like, number 2 is I need to have a discussion that helps us adjust the backlog based on what the user says out of that meeting.
The feedback.
Yeah, I was like, if either of those things are not happening in the sprint review, I told the team, I was like, feel free to either pull me aside, or I'm me, so I don't mind getting challenged in front of a group of people. I don't really care. But I was like, feel free to say something about it. If either of those things, either we're not talking to users and asking them questions and getting a feel, and we're not changing anything in the backlog given what we hear and talk about in the sprint reviews.
How many times have you been on a team where that doesn't happen, where people simply throw up a PowerPoint deck and say, this is what we worked on, right? It's not working software that's being shown, but it's just stuff that's talked about. And so you can't really give feedback on a PowerPoint slide that you see, right? That's what I tell my teams is, you can show that, that's great, but how's a customer going to give you feedback on something they're not looking at? They're not looking at the product. They're looking at a PowerPoint slide. So I try and banish those as much as I can from the review. Just show finished software.
Yeah. Show finished software and show what you did. And if the items that you're showing don't have business value, then you have a different issue that you need to solve for.
Right. You worked on stuff that you perhaps shouldn't have.
Yeah, I would say that kind of the challenge there is a lot of organizations showing the problems, making the problems visible. That is not appreciated because the culture does not allow you to talk about problems openly in a way where you can dedicate yourself to fixing them. Because servicing problems openly is like accusatory. It's seen as accusatory, And,
it's a blame culture, not a problem-solving culture. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so there's other things that probably could be added to this list that I would think, or maybe revise some things. If you're in a blame culture, like Scrum's probably not going to work for you.
That's true.
If your culture has one of these tech leads that's like trying to make sure that everyone is 87.3% utilized on every single, Scrum's probably not going to work for you either. Because peer programming is going to go right out the window first thing. They're going to be like, whoa, my goodness, how can I, two people to do one work item? You're going to cut our efficiency in half. Our efficiency.
Those are the types of folks that say we don't need to do a retrospective. The team needs time to work on stuff. So there's no time to look at how we're working and improve. We don't need that. We're already good.
Yeah, you can get whatever you need in retrospective done in 30 minutes.
That's right.
You don't need it. You don't need a full hour for that. Like, let alone me coming in and telling them, like, you really should have an hour and a half for this. Right. And we should use the first probably 10 or 15 minutes just doing a little icebreaker to kind of ease the mood and get everyone used to talking. It's like, oh my goodness, you're going to spend 15 minutes in the workday not talking about work? Like, yeah, I am. Yes, I am. Yeah, that never goes over well in those kind of cultures. But that, like, doing stuff like that immediately lets me know that success is not guaranteed right off the bat.
It's probably going to be quite illusory, really. You're not going to get it easily. It'll be a battle.
Let's thumb through the conclusion that he comes to in the article. So he wants to highlight the importance of understanding when to use Scrum, right? The importance of each of these items. And it says, it baffles me how organizations transform entire departments into Scrum teams. They appear to view Scrum as a silver bullet to, air quotes, become agile. But it doesn't work this way. Which we've kind of been talking about the whole time.
Right.
Using Scrum or being agile should never be the goal. It should always be, how can we maximize the chances to achieve my goals? I don't know. I think it should be like, how can I maximize the effectiveness of the software that I'm producing? Or what are the best chances of me producing something that's valuable every single time I release software? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because this talks more about maximize the chances to achieve my goals, and now it depends what your goals are rather than contributing to the organizational goal of why you're there in the first place, right?
Yeah. Well, that comes back to product. You need tiered levels of goals, and some are strategic, some are tactical, and that's a whole different thing. Let me finish here, and then we'll wrap up. If you're not taking all the boxes yet, I see. It
could be that you're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
For example, you may not have had your stakeholders at the sprint review, or you may not work with properly defined product yet, but you're putting effort into realizing that you need to do these things given the kind of what he's outlined. I think I'm always on the lookout for articles that will help your typical Scrum Master break through to management, or maybe break through to their direct person they're working for, whoever that is in the organization, or anything that kind of eases a conversation that needs to be had. So I kind of like the way that this was written, pretty
easy to read.
Pretty easy to read. Even though some of the bullet points didn't really line up with the headers, but we could get through it fine.
Sure.
So, but
his English is a lot better than my Dutch, so I'm fine with that. I think when you looked at it first, it might have been the fact that Scrum is really not a silver bullet, is his main point, right? If you're not doing certain things, you don't need Scrum. And he says in the conclusion, he's coached some teams away from Scrum because the prerequisites weren't there that he highlights as his 6 bullets.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Well, there's some kind of every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square kind of analogy that I can make here, where like just because you transformed all your teams to Scrum doesn't mean that your organization is agile in any way, shape, or form. But you can have an agile organization without having Scrum.
Absolutely. Amen. Absolutely true. Well said.
I mean, there's probably a conversation to dig at a little deeper to say, if your management really is trusting the teams and you don't have, and I don't know how much I believe what I'm about to say. If you have a management that is sort of laid back, that understands that you should be inspecting how the customer views your software, good ways to judge a customer's happiness, and you have forecasts that are built off of flow metrics, not off of other ridiculous things, then all your teams theoretically could be Kanban teams. Again, this goes back to our discussion earlier where you need good DevOps practices and stuff to make that work, but you don't really need the time-boxed events and all that kind of.
But that assumes a certain level of maturity.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a really advanced. I almost don't even want to go down that road because that's a topic for another time.
I've seen more teams struggle moving from Scrum that they've been doing quite well, actually, switching to Kanban and then struggling, as opposed to teams that do that and also excel.
Yeah.
Just because I personally think Kanban requires a greater level of discipline. It's not like, oh, well, there's no time box, so I'm fine, working on stuff. It's still in the doing column 3 days later.
Yeah.
No, I coach my teams to say every day when we synchronize, say, what's keeping us from moving this card to the done column? Let's talk about that. I don't want to know what you worked on today, what you worked on yesterday, all of that stuff, right? I mean, so it just depends, I think. But yeah, there are some teams that really rock it when they go to Kanban. But they've had a history of working together well and, less churn, all of that stuff. This was an interesting one.
Yeah, it was cool. I think, I've kind of found this article because I was sort of looking for different things and kind of poking around. And I wanted to bring it up. I might do that more often. I might highlight some articles and some authors and stuff. There's a lot of good blogs like this. I mean, then the SeriousScrum blog, like we looked at before, it looks like he's kind of taking things from all around that they find helpful and kind of highlighting them on the website, SeriousScrum.com. So it was pretty cool. And I'll give Willem-Jan Ageling, give him a shout out when we post this, just to let him know. But yeah, this was neat. Maybe we'll do more article-based type of reviews and stuff like that.
Sprinkle them in once in a while.
Yeah, once in a while.
Yeah, that'll be good. But let us know if you want us to delve into something specific that you've been wondering about.
That's right. And let me know if you don't.
Let me know if you don't.
No, don't let me know if you don't.
Yeah. Don't let... Okay. Just hit the like button.
Oh, I was gonna say hit the X button and make us go away. No. You don't have to make us.
Do that.
You don't have to make us go away.
Yeah.
Because we're leaving.
That's right.